Adam means nothing, Rachel snapped. And I remember thinking, even in that first second, that nobody defends a stranger that fast unless the stranger isn't a stranger at all. My name is Eric. I've been married to Rachel for 9 years, long enough that I stopped counting anniversaries by the number and started counting them by the shape of our life together. The apartment on Hollis Avenue we'd slowly filled with furniture we actually liked, the Sunday mornings that used to be the best part of my week. I never imagined I'd be the kind of man standing in his own kitchen asking his wife who a name on her phone belonged to. But there I was, on a Tuesday night in February, watching her face do something I'd never seen it do before. Not surprise, not confusion, something closer to a door slamming shut behind her eyes. It hadn't started with a fight. It had started 3 weeks earlier, with something so small I almost laughed about it at the time. Rachel had started going out, not occasionally, the way she used to when a coworker had a birthday, but with a kind of frequency that felt new. Clubs, mostly. Places with names I didn't recognize, that she'd mention in passing the way you'd mention the weather. The first time, I asked if I could come along. She said it was a girl's thing, which was true enough that I didn't push. The second time, I asked again, more out of habit than suspicion, and she gave me a look that told me the question itself had become an inconvenience. You used to love going out, I said. I still do, she said. I just don't need you there every single time, Eric. Is that allowed? I remember the exact tone of her voice, because it was the first time in 9 years she'd made allowed sound like an accusation rather than a genuine question. I let it go. That's the part one keeps circling back to now. How many times, in the weeks that followed, I let something go because pushing felt like it would cost more than staying quiet. That Tuesday, she came home a little after midnight smelling of cigarette smoke that wasn't hers. She'd quit years earlier, and something underneath it, a cologne I didn't recognize, sharp and unfamiliar against the collar of her jacket. I was sitting up in bed when she came in, not because I'd been waiting for her exactly, but because sleep hadn't been coming easily that week. Good night, I asked. Fine, she said, already halfway to the bathroom, already turning her body away from the question before I'd finished asking it. I lay there afterward, listening to the water run, trying to talk myself out of the thing I already knew I was starting to feel. 9 years is a long time to build trust. It's also, I would learn, a long time for trust to become something closer to a habit than an active choice. The kind of thing you stop checking on because checking on it feels insulting to both people involved. 2 nights later, her phone buzzed on the counter while she was in the shower, and I saw the notification before I could stop myself from seeing it. A name I didn't recognize, a message preview cut off after 4 words. Can't stop thinking about. I didn't open it. I want to be honest about that, because it matters for everything that follows. I had every opportunity, in that moment, to look further, and I chose not to. Some part of me was still operating on the belief that not looking meant nothing had actually happened yet, as if the not knowing itself was a kind of protection. When she came out of the shower, I asked, as casually as I could manage, who'd texted her. Work stuff, she said. Boring. Don't worry about it. There's a specific weightlessness that comes with being told not to worry, right at the exact moment you've started to. It doesn't reassure you. It just tells you, very clearly, that the person saying it already knows you have a reason to. I didn't ask again that week. I told myself I was giving her space, the way a reasonable husband gives his wife space, the way 9 years of trust had earned her the benefit of every doubt I could still manufacture. What I didn't let myself admit, not yet, not for a while longer, was that giving her space had started to feel less like generosity and more like fear. Fear of the answer. Fear of what asking directly might force both of us to look at. That following weekend, we had dinner with her friend Grace, who'd known Rachel since college and had a laugh that filled up whatever room she was in. Somewhere between the appetizer and the entree, Grace made an offhand comment about the new place downtown being Rachel's favorite spot lately, and Rachel's fork paused for exactly half a second before she changed the subject to something about Grace's job. I noticed the pause. I didn't know yet what it meant. I just filed it away, the way you file away a splinter you haven't figured out how to remove. I didn't know it yet, but the name I'd glimpsed on her phone that Thursday night wasn't going to disappear the way I was hoping it would. It was going to become the only name that mattered for a very long time. The next few weeks settled into something that looked, from the outside, exactly like our marriage always had. We still cooked dinner together most nights. We still fell asleep to the same shows. If you'd asked me, in the third week of March, whether my marriage was in trouble, I think I would have hesitated, not because everything was fine, but because nothing was dramatically, undeniably wrong. It was smaller than that, quieter, the kind of wrongness that hides inside routine. Rachel had started keeping her phone on her at all times. Not on the counter anymore, not charging on the nightstand where it had lived for years, but in her pocket or in her bag, always within reach, always face down when it was visible at all. I noticed. I didn't say anything, not yet, because I'd started to understand that saying something out loud would make the feeling real in a way I wasn't ready for. I want to stop here for a second. If you've ever caught yourself building an entire internal case against someone you love, evidence gathering quietly in the back of your mind while your mouth kept saying everything's fine, you already know how exhausting that particular kind of silence becomes. It isn't peace. It just looks like peace from a distance. Rachel's friend Talia came by one afternoon to drop off a book she'd borrowed, and while Rachel was in the other room, Talia asked me, almost too casually, how things had been going. Good, I said. Busy. You know how it is. Talia nodded, and then said something I didn't understand the weight of until much later. Just take care of yourself, okay? Whatever's going on. I asked what she meant. She said, nothing, forget it, and changed the subject so fast it left a kind of static in the air, the sense that she'd almost said something and caught herself at the last second. I called Rachel out on it that night, gently, asking if everything was okay between her and Talia, since Talia had seemed strange. Rachel's answer came too fast, the way answers do when they've been prepared in advance. Talia's dramatic. Don't read into it. I wanted to believe her. Wanting to believe someone and actually believing them, I was starting to learn, are not the same thing, even though for years I'd never had to notice the difference. The clubbing continued, though she'd started calling it different things, a work thing, catching up with people from the old office, names that shifted depending on which excuse fit the day. One Friday, she left in a dress I hadn't seen before, dark red, and when I told her she looked nice, something crossed her face too quickly for me to name. Not pleasure exactly, something closer to guilt wearing pleasure's expression. That was the night I first heard the name Adam out loud, though not from her. I'd gone to pick up dinner near the part of downtown where she said she'd be meeting friends, and I recognized her laugh through the open door of a bar before I saw her. A laugh I knew the shape of, but hadn't heard directed at anyone but me in longer than I wanted to admit. She was at a corner table with people I didn't recognize, and a man beside her, leaning in close to say something that made her laugh again, his hand resting on the back of her chair in a way that wasn't quite touching her and wasn't quite not. I didn't go in. I stood outside for maybe 90 seconds, long enough to watch the bartender come by and call out, "Another round for you and Adam," and watch Rachel nod without correcting him, without adding, "And my husband's probably wondering where I am," without any of the small tells that might have meant this was nothing. I want to be honest that I didn't confront her that night. I went home, and when she came in past midnight, I asked how her evening was, and she said, "Fine, same as always." And I said nothing about the bar, or the name, or the hand on the back of her chair. I told myself I needed more than a glimpse through a doorway before I said something I couldn't take back. The truth, looking back, is that I was still hoping, actively, desperately hoping, that if I waited long enough, she would tell me herself, and I wouldn't have to be the one to break whatever fragile thing was still holding us together. She didn't tell me. Not that week, not the next. There's a version of this story where I confronted her outside that bar, right then, and everything that followed happened faster, with less damage accumulating in between. I think about that version sometimes. I don't know if it would have changed the ending. I only know it would have changed how long I spent believing I still had a choice in the matter. A few days later, I found a receipt in her jacket pocket while doing laundry, a bar tab, split between two names, only one of which was hers, dated the same night as the corner table and the laugh I recognized. I didn't say anything about that either. I was starting to build something without realizing it, a private ledger of small proofs I wasn't ready to present out loud, as if the act of collecting them quietly could somehow soften whatever conversation was waiting at the end of it. I didn't know it yet, but that receipt was the first of many things I'd end up keeping folded in the same drawer, each one small enough to explain away on its own, all of them together telling a story I still wasn't letting myself read. By April, The smallest interactions between us had taken on a strange, careful quality, like two people navigating a room they both knew had a trap somewhere in it, neither one willing to say where. Rachel had grown more distant in ways that were hard to point to directly. She'd stopped asking about my day with any real curiosity, started answering my questions about hers with single words that closed the conversation rather than opening it. I called her friend Grace one evening, hoping, foolishly, I can see now, that she might tell me something honest if I asked directly enough. Is Rachel seeing someone? I asked, point blank, my voice steadier than I felt. There was a pause on the line long enough that the pause itself was an answer. Eric, that's not. I really can't be in the middle of this, Grace said finally. You should talk to Rachel. That's not a no, I said. It's not a yes either, she said, and I could hear something strained in her voice, like she was holding a door shut with her whole body. Please, just talk to her. I hung up feeling worse than before I'd called, not because I'd learned anything concrete, but because Grace's refusal to say no had told me more than any direct answer could have. Some silences are louder than words. That was one of them. The following week, I ran into Talia at the grocery store, and something in her had shifted since our last conversation. She looked at me with an expression I can only describe as pity, quickly masked, before she said hello. I asked her, carefully, if she'd heard anything about Rachel and someone named Adam. Her face did something complicated. I really shouldn't say anything, she said. It's not my place. But, Eric, just be careful. Pay attention to what's actually in front of you, okay? Not what you want to be in front of you. I want to stop here for a second. If you've ever had someone almost tell you a truth and then pull back at the last moment, leaving you to sit with the shape of what they didn't say, you know exactly the kind of quiet that follows. It's worse, somehow, than silence from someone who knows nothing at all. That was the moment, I think, looking back now, when I truly started to doubt, not the vague unease of February, but something colder and more specific. I'd called it paranoia for 2 months. I wouldn't call it that anymore. This is what Rachel told me, much later, about a night she spent with Adam that same week, a scene I had no access to as it was happening. I told myself, sitting across from him that night, that this was the last time I'd let myself feel this reckless. I kept thinking about Eric at home, probably watching something on the couch, having no idea, and it should have made me feel guilty enough to leave. Instead, it made me feel invisible in a way I hated admitting, like the version of me that existed in our apartment had stopped being someone Adam or I needed to think about while we were somewhere else. I told myself 4 months wasn't that long in the grand scheme of a marriage, that it would end on its own eventually, that I'd stop before it became something either of us couldn't undo. I didn't believe myself even as I said it. That's what she told me. At the time, I only knew that something in her had gone somewhere I couldn't follow, and that every excuse she offered me afterward had started sounding rehearsed in a way it never had before. I started noticing behavioral things I'd have dismissed months earlier. The way she'd angle her phone screen away from me, even when texting her mother. The way she'd started taking calls from the bathroom with the fan running. The way she flinched, almost imperceptibly, whenever I said the word club in any context at all. Each one alone meant nothing. Together, they had started forming a shape I couldn't unsee. I mentioned to her, one evening, that I'd heard the name Adam somewhere and asked, as neutrally as I could manage, who he was. That was the first time she snapped at me, not loudly, but with a coldness I hadn't heard from her before. Adam means nothing, she said, already turning away, already ending the conversation before it had properly begun. Why do you even care? I didn't have a good answer for her in that moment, though I've had months since to think of several. What I remember most is not what she said, but how fast she said it. The speed of a denial that had clearly been rehearsed for exactly this question, waiting in her mouth for weeks before I finally asked it. I didn't know it yet, but means nothing was going to become the phrase I replayed more than any other, long after I learned exactly how much it had actually meant. I want to tell you I approached what came next with a clear head. The truth is closer to the opposite. I spent the better part of 2 weeks oscillating between wanting concrete proof and being terrified of what finding it would actually mean for the life I still, somewhere, hoped I could save. A coworker of mine mentioned, almost in passing, that her cousin Denise did a bit of freelance investigative work, background checks, mostly, but also the occasional more delicate situation. I called Denise on a Thursday night, my voice shaking in a way that embarrassed me even as I heard it. She was calm in a way I badly needed someone to be. "Tell me what you already know," she said, "and I'll tell you what's worth chasing and what isn't." I told her about the bar, the receipt, the name, the deleted messages I hadn't been brave enough to actually confront Rachel about. Denise was quiet for a moment before she said, "Some of what you're describing could be nothing. Some of it sounds like more than nothing. I can find out which is which if you want me to." I said yes before I'd fully thought through what yes would cost me. Over the following 10 days, Denise put together a picture I wasn't prepared for, even though some part of me had been braced for it since February. Photographs. Rachel and Adam outside a restaurant I'd never heard her mention, their hands close together on the table, not quite touching in the photo, but close enough that the not touching felt deliberate. A pattern of visits to the same bar, twice a week, going back at least 4 months, longer than I'd let myself imagine. A deleted message thread Denise had managed to partially recover, fragments of it. "Can't stop thinking about you." The same for words I'd glimpsed weeks earlier and not opened, now confirmed to be exactly what I'd feared. Not everything Denise found turned out to matter. There was a name that came up early in her research, a man Rachel had lunch with twice, who turned out to be nothing more than an old college friend passing through town, someone I'd chased down myself in a moment of paranoia, only to find a completely innocent explanation once I finally asked Rachel directly and, for once, believed her answer. I mentioned that because it matters. Not everything I suspected was true, and there were moments in those weeks where I let my fear write conclusions the evidence hadn't actually earned. I owe myself, at least, the honesty of admitting that. But Adam was real. The 4 months were real. And once Denise laid the photographs out in front of me on her kitchen table, something in me went very quiet and very cold. The particular stillness that comes right before you finally let yourself believe something you've been fighting to disbelieve for weeks. I went back to the bar myself, the following Tuesday, and spoke to the bartender directly. A young guy who recognized Rachel's name immediately and, after some hesitation and a folded bill I probably shouldn't have offered, confirmed what I already suspected. "Yeah, she's in here a lot with that guy. Adam. They're pretty obviously together, man. I figured she was married to him. Honestly, the way they act." I sat in my car outside that bar for almost half an hour afterward, the photographs Denise had given me sitting in an envelope on the passenger seat. And I thought about every single time over the past 4 months that Rachel had told me I was reading into things, that Adam meant nothing, that I needed to trust her more. I thought about how many of those moments I'd chosen to believe her, not because the evidence supported it, but because believing her was easier than the alternative. I called Denise one more time that night, mostly just to hear a voice that had been honest with me from the start. "You've got everything you need," she said. "The question now isn't whether it's true. It's what you're going to do once you say it out loud to her." I didn't know it yet, but the conversation I was bracing myself for, careful, evidence laid out, controlled, wasn't anything close to the one Rachel and I were actually about to have. I waited until Saturday morning, the envelope from Denise sitting on the kitchen table between us like something neither of us wanted to acknowledge directly. "We need to talk," I said, and even as the words left my mouth, I registered the strange symmetry of it. How many times she'd said that exact phrase to me over the years, always about something small, and how heavy it felt now, coming from me, about something that wasn't small at all. "About what?" Rachel said, arms already crossing over her chest, her voice already sharpening into the defensive register I'd started to recognize. I slid the envelope across the table. She didn't open it right away. She looked at it, then at me, and something in her face shifted from irritation into something colder, more calculated, like she was recalculating how much of the truth the situation was actually going to require. "Adam means nothing," she said, before she'd even looked inside. "You keep saying that," I said, my voice cracking despite every effort to keep it steady. "For months, Rachel. The bartender knows your name. He knows your drink order. He thought you were married to him. Explain to me how that's nothing." She opened the envelope then, flipped through the photographs without much visible reaction. And when she finally looked up, there was no crack in her expression at all. No guilt, no shame, nothing I recognized as remorse. "So you hired someone to spy on me," she said. "That's what you did instead of just asking me like an adult." "I did ask you. Multiple times. You lied every single time." Maybe I lied because you were already accusing me of things before I'd done anything wrong, she said, and I felt the ground shift under that sentence. The particular vertigo of being told the version of events I'd lived through hadn't actually happened the way I remembered it. You've been suspicious of me for months, Eric. Constantly checking my phone. Constantly asking who I was talking to. Do you know what that does to a person? Maybe I found something with Adam because you'd already stopped trusting me long before there was anything to distrust. I want to be honest that this landed somewhere in me. For just a moment, the particular skill of being made to doubt your own memory of events, of being told your reasonable suspicion was actually the cause of the thing it was responding to. It took me a second to find my footing again. I didn't start checking your phone until after you started lying to me. I said, that's not the same thing, and you know it isn't. Believe whatever you need to believe, she said, standing up now, pacing toward the window. It doesn't change anything. How long has it actually been? The truth, not 4 months if that's not even accurate. She was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, something in her posture had changed, not softened exactly, but shifted, like she'd decided continuing to deny it wasn't worth the energy anymore. For months, she said. Since October. It started at a work thing his firm was doing, some mixer I only went to because Grace dragged me along. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend I regret all of it, because I don't. I felt more like myself in the last 4 months than I have in years. I'm not going to apologize for that just because it's inconvenient for you to hear. Not going to apologize, I repeated, the words feeling strange in my mouth. You lied to my face for 4 months, and you're not going to apologize. What do you want me to say, Eric? That I'm sorry? Fine. I'm sorry you found out. I'm not sorry it happened. I sat there for a moment, absorbing the particular cruelty of that distinction. Sorry I got caught, not sorry for what I did. And something in me that had been holding on to some small, foolish hope finally let go entirely. Do you love him? I asked, and I'm still not sure why that was the question that came out, of everything I could have asked. I don't know, she said. I know I don't feel anything close to what I used to feel in this apartment. Maybe that's the same thing. Maybe it isn't. So what happens now? I'm not staying here to be interrogated for the next 6 months, she said, already moving toward the bedroom. I'll get my things this week. You can have the apartment. I don't want it anymore anyway. There was no confession monologue in the way I'd braced myself for. No tearful accounting of how it started. No explanation offered in a voice that wanted forgiveness. Just a woman packing a bag with brisk, efficient movements, answering my questions in short sentences, already 3 steps removed from the life we'd shared for 9 years. That's it, I said, standing in the doorway of our bedroom, watching her fold clothes into a suitcase like she was preparing for a business trip rather than the end of a marriage. 9 years, and that's it? What do you want me to say, Eric? She said again, not looking up. You have your proof. You have your envelope. I don't owe you a performance on top of it. I didn't know it yet, standing there, but that would be the last real conversation Rachel and I would ever have as a married couple. And somewhere underneath the anger, a part of me was already, quietly, starting to feel something closer to relief than I was ready to admit. Rachel moved out 3 days later, taking most of what had been hers, and leaving behind the things that had always felt more like mine anyway. A bookshelf we'd bought together in our first year, a set of mugs from a trip to the coast we'd taken back, when trips together still felt uncomplicated. She didn't ask for counseling. She didn't ask for time to think it over. There was no version of this ending where she came back a week later wanting to try again. No long process of reconciliation attempted and failed. She was simply gone, in the efficient, unsentimental way she'd packed that suitcase, and I was left standing in an apartment that suddenly felt much larger than it had a month earlier. I called Grace once, weeks later, mostly to understand what I hadn't been able to see. She apologized, finally, for how long she'd stayed quiet. I told her she needed to tell you herself, Grace said. I told her more than once. I didn't think it was my place to be the one who broke it to you, and I still don't fully know if that was the right call. I'm sorry, Eric. I really am. I told her I understood. Even though understanding and being okay with it were 2 different things, I was still learning to separate. Talia reached out once too, a short message that said simply, I should have said more, sooner. I'm sorry. I didn't respond right away. When I finally did, weeks later, I told her I appreciated it, and that I didn't need her to carry guilt over something that was never hers to fix in the first place. I never heard directly from Adam, and I never sought him out. I heard, secondhand, through someone who knew someone at his firm, that whatever he and Rachel had together didn't survive the transition from secret to public, that the version of their relationship that had thrived in the shadows of my marriage seemed to lose something essential once it no longer had anything to hide from. I don't know if that's true. I've stopped needing it to be one way or the other. Whatever happens between them isn't mine to track anymore. I called it his mistake and hers both, at first. The fact that I'd spent so many months giving Rachel the benefit of every doubt, hoping she'd tell me the truth voluntarily rather than forcing me to go find it myself. I don't think that excuses what she did, not even slightly. But I've come to understand my own part in it clearly enough now that I don't intend to repeat it. The habit of choosing hope over evidence, of mistaking silence for peace. The apartment on Hollis Avenue is still mine. I kept it, mostly because moving felt like giving something up I hadn't actually lost. The space itself had never done anything wrong. Some mornings I still catch myself listening for her key in the door before I remember there's no reason to. That reflex is fading slower than I expected and faster than I feared. If there's a lesson in 9 years ending the way this one did, it isn't really about Rachel or Adam, or even the 4 months I spent not knowing what I already, on some level, suspected. It's about the difference between trusting someone and refusing to look at what's actually in front of you, because looking felt like it might cost you something you weren't ready to lose. I lost it anyway. I just lost more time on the way there than I needed to. I don't hate her, not most days. I loved her for 9 years, and I don't think loving someone that long disappears just because the story ended somewhere ugly. What I've learned to hold on to instead is simpler. I asked the question. Eventually, I asked it, and I kept asking until I got an answer that was actually true, even when the truth cost me everything. I thought I still had left to lose. The most telling moment in this story isn't the confrontation itself. It's the speed of Rachel's denial the first time Eric said the name Adam out loud. A rehearsed coldness that reveals she had been anticipating that exact question for weeks before it arrived, quietly preparing her defense while Eric was still preparing his hope. What the story ultimately exposes is a particular form of manipulation that doesn't rely on elaborate lies so much as on turning the victim's own reasonable suspicion into evidence of his character flaw. Rachel's accusation that Eric's checking caused her betrayal, rather than responded to it, is the same move gaslighters make across countless relationships, reframing the wound as the wound's cause. Grace and Talia's silence functions as its own quiet betrayal, revealing how loyalty to a friend can curdle into complicity when it prioritizes comfort over honesty. Neither woman lied outright, but both let their silence do work they weren't willing to do with words. Unlike stories that end in remorse and reconciliation, this one refuses Eric the closure of an apology that means anything, forcing him to build his peace without her cooperation, which is in some ways a harder and more honest kind of ending. The absence of any real consequence for Adam is deliberate and true to life. Affairs rarely distribute their damage evenly, and the story doesn't pretend otherwise. What remains, in the end, is Eric's growing understanding that trust without honest inquiry isn't trust at all. It's avoidance wearing trust's clothing, and the real work ahead of him is learning to ask hard questions before the evidence forces his hand.